She inhaled and walked onward, lowering her flashlight. The windows ahead were boarded up, but allowed a few small streams of light, though outside was still foggy and gray. Lacey opened the first door, grimacing as it gave a loud creak. She picked up her flashlight again and shone it around the room. It was small and full of boxes. She scurried over to them and crouched down, back pressed against the wall, so that she could see if anything crossed in front of the door. Not that it would happen. Say, was it even a sure thing that this place wasn't just old and broken? Were the stories about the Sheridan Manor not mere superstitions? Lacey scoured the boxes, glancing at the doorway for any sign of all things strange. And there were none. A bit discouraged at not coming across the brush, she lifted her dress and stood up, quietly walking out of her current room and entering the next one. It was a bedroom, and one not too shabby, Lacey noticed. A poster bed and 2 velvet couches sat there. Lacey went and settled down on one couch, her mind now focusing on her grumbling stomach. Nervously, she pulled out a loaf of bread she'd packed in her coat pocket and took a small bite, maintaining ladylike manners even in a place like this. Lacey's heart ached at the thought of Anton. He was a good man, and their courtship was well approved of from both parties. She wondered how his parents would react, knowing she went off in search for a brush to prove young men wrong and further impress their son. Lacey opened her eyes and thought she saw a figure pass in front of the doorway. She screamed and slapped her hand over her mouth. Standing up, she fingered the dagger Anton had slipped to her before her journey. She walked towards the door and looked around her. Her eyes only fell upon a quiet and empty hallway. Stepping back inside the room, she gently shut the door and locked it with a key that was hung on a wall nail. She tiptoed back to her spot on the couch. Heart thudding, she remembered why she'd even set foot on the moor. This was all for Anton. She was going to prove she was worthy enough for him. Perhaps he'd see he needn't wait any longer and propose. Tucking her barely tasted loaf back in her coat pocket, she peered outside. Night had fallen. The gloomy and dark outside was now pure black against her window, so that she couldn't see if anything was out on the compound. Like Anton had told her, she shouldn't travel once it was nighttime. Come tomorrow early morning, and the brush was not found. She was to journey back immediately. Although the lads knew Anton longer than she, Lacey was still sure in her heart that if she entered town with a brush marked with a star or without, Anton would still be enamored of her, and 'twas this peaceful thought that prompted Lacey to get up and prepare the bed for the night. She placed the key on the desk and pulled back the covers and slipped inside, hand clutching the dagger. Now, despite all horrors and thoughts of them, incredibly, she was able to drift off into a stirring slumber, and then a deep one, and this would have continued had it not been for that small noise that stood out in the dreadful silence. A click. Lacey's eyes widened, and she dared not move an inch. Under the covers, she enclosed her hand around the dagger in her satchel and surveyed the possible cause with only her eyes. Eyes adjusted and looking around. Nothing seemed out of place, and she almost missed it as the room was too dark, but then she didn't. The door. It was open. Lacey's heart hammered inside her chest, and she murmured silent prayers as she slipped out the dagger and quietly stepped out of the bed. She glanced at the desk where she placed the key, and it was still there. Fierce was but a word if the one who exhibited it was no more. Anton would understand. She pressed against the door jamb and slid out of the bedroom, as quiet as could be, and shone her flashlight in the hallway. She was met with nothing. She pursed her lips and crept forward, wondering she had gone mad. Wouldn't one think they, too, had gone mad if they were in Lacey's shoes? Was it not one's mind playing tricks on them? Lacey's forehead broke out in a cold sweat. She would have to disobey Anton and travel by night. She turned around and gasped. In front of her stood a shadow. Its mouth was gaping and took half of its face, and in the place where eyes sat were black sunken holes. It reared its head back with insane speed and lowered it again, the eyeless holes now filled with demonic ones. Lacey fell to her knees, screaming, and rushed to the staircase on her fours. She dared not look back at that thing. Not paying any mind to injury, she threw herself down the staircase, landing with a thud. She didn't halt once before dashing to the doors of the manor, but didn't get to open it before she felt an icy, scaly hand grab her ankle. Lacey shrieked and clawed at the ground, her eyes shut tight, not wanting to turn around. It sank its nails into her flesh. Lacey screamed with tears pouring out of her eyes. The whistles of the train sounded as it passed them and left down the moor. When the last faint whistle was blown, the creature convulsed. Lacey's raw throat gave its last shriek as it lunged for her. And it just so happened that when Lacey was no more, the empty portrait on the staircase had a new face on it. Story 2. Title: Leave. Jessica woke because of the cold. Icy tendrils of damp were clawing at her arms, and the chattering of her teeth was enough to make her jaw ache. Beside her, Jackson slept soundly. The duvet was tucked around her shoulders, and his face was relaxed and innocently boyish. The cold that seemed to be seeping into her very bones didn't appear to be affecting him in the slightest. Jessica remembered her mother talking about fevers, so hot they tricked you into thinking that the burning you felt was ice. She certainly felt like she wasn't completely awake. The semi-dreamlike state was disorienting, and when a car went past and lit the room with its headlights, she could see mist curling around the corners of the bedroom. Jackson's house was fully insulated, and he'd talked about the cost of getting his windows double-glazed only last month. Granted, it was her first overnight stay here, but Jackson took pride in everything he had. The house would not let in fog. Jessica wished that she could wake up fully and move her arms. Her limbs felt like lead, the illness weighing them down. The bedside light was close, and the light would help her assess how sick she was. Maybe Jackson would even wake up and check her temperature for her. If only she could lift her hand to turn it on. Leave. The fever must be strong if she was hallucinating. The voice was faint enough that she knew she was imagining it. Leave. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, her fevered mind, unable to pinpoint the direction of the sound. Leave. Her heart was beating too quickly, a staccato rhythm at the base of her throat, and she wondered if she might need an ambulance. Leave. 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 Another car. Another fleeting brightening of the room. The paralysis broke, and Jessica's scream filled the room. Jackson woke up immediately, and his light was on before Jessica had finished the exhale. In the harsh light, Jessica's fever vanished like it had never been. Jackson was angry when she couldn't explain the scream, which she found hurtful. Surely he could give her a break? After she told him about the strange fever, and given his examinations of the goosebumps on her arms, he was mollified, but his shoulders turned away from her as he settled. Irritated that she disturbed his sleep for no good reason, she watched him fall asleep again, wishing that she could pacify him with a tale of a night terror or the glimpse of a mouse. But how could she explain the bloodied face of the woman and the broken grasping fingers that had reached for her? She obsessed about it the next day and made an excuse to avoid returning that night. The woman's face was imprinted on her mind, and she replayed the moment again and again. The caved cheekbones, the shattered teeth, the torn fingernails. By the weekend, Jackson was getting annoyed with her avoidance. He had bought groceries to make her dinner, he complained, and they were going to go to waste without her. He wanted to know why she was skittish and suddenly had to work late. Was she seeing someone else? Didn't she love him anymore? She was his world. His everything. Was she abandoning him? He sounded so heartbroken that she gave in. After a few days of distance, the memory was losing its edge, and she knew that a bad dream, for what else could it have been, wasn't worth compromising her relationship for. She returned. They had a lovely evening. Jackson made pasta, and they drank wine on the porch, talking about work and families. There was a bit of tension when she mentioned spending time with a following weekend. Jackson had planned a trip to the theater, so Jessica canceled on Annie and everything was fine. She would have more fun with him anyway. None of her friends really understood her the way he did. He was so happy when she told him that she could go, that it more than made up for the sadness in her friend's voice. He was right, too. Annie was just jealous and being selfish. She was so lucky to have him. It took Jessica a long time to drift off. The slightest rustle of the curtain was enough to wake her from her shallow slumber. But eventually, she succumbed to the pull of unconsciousness. Leave. The voice startled her awake. Once again, her limbs were heavy, and she was trapped in the hell of her body. Leave? This time, the source of the noise was obvious. It was coming from the shadow in the corner. As Jessica watched, dumb with terror, the shadow moved. It scaled the walls with jerky movements. A passing car lit the room briefly, and Jessica caught a glimpse of a body, twisted and grotesque, climbing towards the ceiling. Its face was turned towards her, and she saw that it was the woman from before. Her arms were hanging oddly, perhaps broken, and she dragged herself up in fits and starts. Jessica's breath was quick and shallow. Her chest was the only part of her that was moving. Leave? The woman was almost directly above her. Leave. What had been the dry rustle of the wind through leaves in a graveyard was getting louder. Now, the scrape of ragged nails under a closed lid. Now, the frenzied cry of the forever trapped. L-E-A-V-E, Jackson swore as he woke, all flailing limbs and angry confusion. He thought she was the cause, and what could Jessica say? The dead woman screamed it. Not me. He wouldn't be calmed, either, and they ended up standing, Jackson fury personified and Jessica cowering before his wrath. The names he called her weren't fair, but who could blame him? As far as he was concerned, Jessica had waited till he was asleep and then shocked him awake with a jarring noise. What would the neighbors think? What kind of sick sense of humor did she have? At one point, he raised his hand and Jessica flinched. But he saw and caught himself, scooping her up in apologetic arms. He was sorry for that. She'd pushed him so far, but she didn't deserve that. They fell back asleep with limbs entangled, Jessica tightly ensconced in his embrace. And the woman did not return. They stayed at hers for a while. Jessica made an effort to make her apartment welcoming for him, enticing him over with favorite beers and lingerie and whispered promises. He enjoyed the attention, relished being treated like a king. Women have forgotten how to treat their men nowadays, he said as Jessica rubbed his shoulders and tried not to think of bloodied lips and exposed bone. It was nice to be with someone who understood how things should be. Jessica nodded and apologized again for the burnt steak at dinner. She didn't tell him it was because she'd looked for the time and thought she'd seen matted hair in the reflection in the glass on the clock. He forgave her, though, and she promised again to be more careful next time. She rubbed her wrist where he'd gripped it so tightly and reassured him again. She evaded his requests to go to his house for the next few weeks. What had been a treat for him had become routine, and he didn't understand why she wouldn't come to him. He had to drive 20 minutes out of his way to get to hers, but his house was only 10 minutes from where she worked. Was it too much to ask for her to put the effort? Eventually, he got tired of listening to her excuses and demanded it. He wasn't being unreasonable. Jackson saw her for who she was, loved her more deeply than anyone else could, and was the only one in the world who truly cared for her. She could get over her objections and give him something in return. So she went back. Every movement made her jump. The scraping of Jackson's chair as he stood up, a squeak. The chiming of the clock, a spilled coffee. The slam of the porch door, a wine glass shattered on the carpet. The storm arrived after that, though. Jessica was putting away the dishes after dinner when the drop of blood in the sink made her raise her head. The woman clung to the cabinets, and her face was inches from Jessica's own. She wore a sense of urgency, like a shawl. "Leave!" Jessica's screech made Jackson turn, and her outgoing arm caught him full in the face. Jackson's rage was to be expected, but the strength of it took her by surprise. She was clumsy and stupid. His lip was swelling, and it was her fault. She'd already ruined a new carpet with a wine that was already staining. Her reactions were ridiculous. Why was she so jumpy anyway? What was she hiding? Why would she hide something from him? Jessica's half-articulated attempts at pacifying him only made it worse. Why was she treating him like a child? He'd been so patient, so good, and this was how she repaid him? With deceit and patronizing excuses? As Jackson advanced, Jessica saw the shadow crouching in the hall. It flinched away from Jackson as he dragged Jessica towards it, shrinking as he shouted about how she was just like other women. She lied and manipulated. She tried to make a fool out of him. She was a conniving bitch. She saw the wide eyes of the woman, streaked with ruptured capillaries and horror, at the bottom of the basement stairs. No words, no pleas for forgiveness would soothe Jackson's ire. He was fury and vengeance and justice. Jessica saw the woman's expression, unmistakably sorrowful, as she wheeled through the air, desperately trying to catch a handhold to save herself. Jessica landed on the cold concrete of the basement, her own body now twisted in sympathy, her own face marred and bloodied to match. Her final breath was scented with the woman's fetid exhale, and the last thing she heard was the mournful whisper. "I tried to warn you. I arrived at Warwick House too early." Jude looked back at me when I checked my watch 9:10 as we drove under great iron arches toward the looming manor. "You okay, Bethy?" "I'm fine. I'll wait outside." "Thanks for driving me, Jude. I owe you one." "Anything for you, Bethy." "Shut up." He laughed. Gravel crunched and spat under my feet as I rolled my suitcase over the driveway. Jude turned in an ungainly circle in the white driveway, and the car disappeared from view. He was proud of that car, a nice little 2017 remodel. I went all the way up to the wide, flat stone steps which tunneled through yawning stone arches toward a great metal door. I was 40 minutes early, so I took a seat behind one of the pillars. To my right was a large, prickly climbing rose plant blocking a mist-shrouded garden area which lined the front face of Warwick House. Place is a little lonely, I thought. Oh, well, I wouldn't be staying long. Just enough to scrape together some money. I'd been fired from my last job, managing another place like Warwick House. That's where I met Jude, because the owner didn't seem to like smoking on the job. Finally, the door clicked and heaved open. A middle-aged man looked out of the doorway, his graying, sandy hair dim from the darkness inside. He began to withdraw, like a tired turtle into its shell. I scrambled upward. He stopped and I rushed forward, my hand outstretched, my suitcase dragging behind me. "Sorry, I'm here," I said. "I'm Beth Kavanaugh. I'm here for the management position." "Ah," he said, shaking my hand. His own was dry but limp. "I'm Ben Del Rey. You're here to see Mrs. Warwick." His voice was gentle. I had to lean in to hear him. "Don't mind the mess," he said as we walked in. The ceilings were impassively high, the walls dark oakwood, one of the greatest Gothic-style manors I'd ever seen, but the ground was spread with crumpled papers, rolled-up pieces of cloth, and broken pieces of furniture. "We're, cleaning up." "Don't worry," I said, because it genuinely seemed to pain him. The last place I worked, I rethought what I was about to say. I didn't want to say anything he might interpret the wrong way. I ended up saying, "Started out pretty messy too. Not when I left it." And laughed. Ben smiled and turned toward a massive grand staircase. "This is the bedroom wing," he said, gesturing up. Then he pointed underneath. "In there is the living room, the parlor, the greenhouse, the library. You can also get to the game room that way, but we don't use that room much. Mrs. Warwick is the only one who'd use that room, and she doesn't get out of bed much." "I see." "Yes," he said. "She's always sick, and she needs someone to manage the place." "Who managed it before me?" "A young lady named Maya," he said, walking up the staircase. "I'll show you to Mrs. Warwick's room, and then I'll take you to yours." We reached the top, where there were two long branching hallways of doors. Ben pointed to the left one. "That's the servants' hallway. That would be Mrs. Lorth, the cook, Dacia, the housekeeper, they're both 80 Winston, the gardener, and myself. And you, of course." He pointed and started walking to the right. "Here are the family rooms. Mrs. Warwick has no family left, so these rooms remain empty." He sounded wistful. "And here, at the end of the hallway, is Mrs. Warwick's room. She's just had a recent blood transfusion, about a week ago, so she's stronger than usual. Go on." He left. I walked toward the closed, black door, framed by two burning yellow wall lamps. I knocked and heard a faint, breathy enter. I pushed the door open and entered. It was a whitewashed room, brilliantly bare. Directly ahead of me was an immense white bed in an ebony bed frame, underneath a window smeared with white paint. I blinked and tried to focus on the creature in bed. She was enormous. That's all I thought at first. Her wide, pink face took up half the pillow supporting her. Her flabby, pink flesh spilled out from under the white bedding, over the entire bed. Her small pink hands were folded on her huge stomach, their hue strangely enunciated by the brilliant white everywhere else. Her eyes were small, but not beady. They were blue and piercing, and looking directly at me. "Good morning, Mrs. Warwick," I heard myself say. I felt very hot and cold in flashes, like I was pulled out of myself and just frozen, watching myself talk to this monstrous woman. "Good morning," she replied, her voice surprisingly light and airy. "I'm Beth the Kavanaugh," I said, walking a little closer. "I'm here for the managing position." A week later, I fell into a routine. I always do, just about that week or 2-week mark. I knew what to say to please Mrs. Warwick, to be sure the bills were paid on time and the servants kept happy. Mrs. Lorth and Dacia were both over 80, so shriveled I could barely believe they could stand up in bed each morning. Winston was 70 at least. Ben Del Rey, on the wrong side of middle-aged, was youngest. I seemed to be the only person in the entire vicinity under 25. There was something strange about them, though. Dacia had a face like a child. It was wrinkled as it should be, but underdeveloped, without a real jawline, and a short nose like a toddler's. Ben and Winston could have been twins, just 15 years apart, and both had eyes that were just not quite right. Almost demonic, and I couldn't tell why. Once, just before bed, Mrs. Warwick called to speak to me about finances for the kitchen. When I entered, I accidentally scraped my arm against the old mahogany splinters, poking out the door, making a little slice on the outside of my forearm. I didn't notice until she said something. "Why, dear, you're bleeding. Come here." I went. Gently, she wiped away the blood with her own fingers. When she thought I wasn't looking, she rubbed on her own arm until the porous pink skin absorbed it completely, closing her eyes in ecstasy. I jumped back, made an excuse, and ran out. The Wednesday after I came, I was going to meet with Mrs. Warwick about ordering supplies for the garden, and heard her already speaking with Ben inside. "But mistress," I heard him say whiningly, and she in response, "No. It must be soon. I can feel it soon, and she's the last I need. After that, everything will be perfect. But it's so hard to find someone else, and she works so well. Just another few weeks, mistress." I knocked softly and heard a jump. "Shh," I heard Mrs. Warwick whisper. I entered. "Hello, ma'am. I'm here to talk about buying for the garden in the fall. Are you busy right now?" She shook her head, jowls shaking, and said in her girlish, unnatural voice, "Leave me, Ben. I'll talk with Betha now." "Then let's not talk about that right now, Bethy. I want to talk about something else. Okay?" "As you know, my dear," she took my hand, caressed it like she loved the very blood flowing in my veins. "I'm sick. Very sick." Yes, everyone else had made a point of telling me this, not to upset her, not to worry her too much. They showed where her medicine was if she needed help. They said things like, she gets transfusions often, a regular thing, about once a month, and another soon. She gets all week and needs emergency measures if we can't get to the hospital in time for the transfusions. I looked full in the face of the enormous old woman. "Why did Ben Del Rey call you mistress? He's not the kind of servant who does that." A real scowl came over her face, and she gripped my hand painfully. "Don't ask questions like that, Bethy. You don't want to know what will happen to you if you do." I sat frozen, trying to tug my hand out and failing. Finally I nodded, and she relaxed her grip. "I'll need another transfusion soon, dear heart," she said, looking up at me with her little sky-blue eyes. "I just need to know, just in case, what type of blood you have." I didn't know what to say. I looked at her, watched the little twitches at the corners of her mouth, the desperate, hungry look in her tiny eyes, the way her two pink hands scrabbled nervously. "B negative," I said finally. It wasn't true. I didn't know why I said that. Maybe I didn't want her rubbing my blood on her skin again. She smiled dollishly and said, "Perfect. That's just lovely, Bethy. Ben sure has a knack." Her eyes trailed up my arms, fan and warm from the sun outside when I talked to Winston that morning. I crossed them self-consciously. "You may go." I nodded at her and left. I ran down the stairs to the kitchen, turned on the sink, and rubbed my arms and face in water so hot it was almost unbearable. I tried to scrub every oily memory of her off my body. Mrs. Lorth watched me silently. "Tell me," I said, turning from the sink, water dripping down my neck. "Are you all related? How come Ben calls Mrs. Winston mistress, and only when I'm not there? Why do Ben and Winston look so alike? Why does Daxia?" She walked over, her thin mouth set angrily, and slapped me hard across the face. I reeled back, tasting blood in my mouth. Staggering, I touched my cheek and gasped, "Hey!" "What? Why did you do that?" Mrs. Lorth walked to the knife drawer, turned, and looked at me with crossed arms. "Don't ask questions, Miss Cavanaugh. I thought we talked about this." She left. I stared at her, treating back, my hand still on my stinging cheek. "Winston," I said carefully, the next morning, "why do you work here? How come everyone looks at me funny?" He was digging holes for crocuses. He stood, dusting off his hands. You don't learn, do you? He stepped closer. I stepped back. I just want to know, I said, uncrossing my arms. I was not going to get slapped again. He returned to the crocuses. We're all linked, if you will, to the mistress. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I saw a flicker in his eyes and realized why they looked so strange. The whites weren't white at all. They were pink, like Mrs. Warwick's skin. You look so strange, all of you. He shrugged again. We're old, Miss Kavanaugh. Old doesn't make Dacia's face look like that. He didn't reply. Why does Mrs. Warwick stay up there? How come she needs transfusions so often? I didn't ask why she'd rubbed my blood against her skin, or why she seemed to take such pleasure from it. He glared with such ferocity that I stepped back. She's sick, he said shortly, and shut his mouth. That night, when the house was dark for the night, I called Jude. I needed to hear a familiar voice. Jude. Hey, what's up? Jude, I don't know what's going on here. I'm scared. Everything's creepy, and the lady has weird skin and gets transfusions a lot. Blood transfusions? Yeah. The servants are all really old, and their eyes look weird, and they call Mrs. Warwick mistress, but only when I'm not there. I'm scared. You're okay, right? For now. Jude paused. Blood transfusions, huh? Yeah. You. Want me to come get you? I don't know, Jude. I called just to let someone know, in case something happens to me. I choked on the words. Okay, Bethy, he said. Call me at noon tomorrow, and if you don't, I'll call the police. Okay, I whispered. I hung up, standing there beside my bed, my phone pressed against my mouth, tears running down my face. The next morning, Dacia cornered me in the parlor. Miss Kavanaugh. A tiny sneer curled her mouth. I've heard you've become a little busybody. I looked at that old yet young face. You've talked to Winston, to Ben. She ticked off her fingers, to Lorth, and even to Mrs. Warwick. So? I asked. Dacia's face contorted into a grimace. What are you prying at, girl? I stood and felt a little safer. I was twice her height. I think you're all demons, Dacia. I was lying, but as she stepped back stricken, I reconsidered. She left the room, and I bit my lip. Could it be? I would call Jude in 4 hours. Then I heard a shriek from upstairs. I jumped, set my phone on the coffee table, and dashed up the stairs. It was Mrs. Warwick. Dacia and Ben ran from the hallway, Mrs. Lorth just behind me. I looked at them, panicking, but in the split second of terror I could see that though their expressions were fearful and shocked, their eyes were calm, calculated. We burst through the door. Mrs. Warwick lay on her bed, mouth open in a scream, body still. Her arms were flung out, her face white as a sheet. Transfusion, Ben shouted, and leaped over the sprawled pillows on the ground, grabbing the fat pink arm. Dacia dashed to the medicine cabinet and pulled out a makeshift IV line, which tumbled out of her hands onto the ground. Ben looked up at me. We don't have the supply. It's supposed to come this afternoon. How long to the hospital? I shouted back. 3 hours. His voice broke. His eyes caught mine before they strangely lost their panic. What's your blood type, Bethy? I'd never gotten tested. B negative, I said, repeating the lie. It was the first thing that came to my head. I've read The Ring of Endless Light. But I didn't realize that Mrs. Warwick wasn't bleeding from the mouth or nose, as you do when you need an emergency transfusion. She looked peaceful. "Can we?" Ben shouted in my face, already attaching the end of the IV to Mrs. Warwick's inner forearm vein and brandishing the other at me. "You're the youngest. You can give enough to save her." I stuttered, blinked, and that was all it took. They had the line in my arm within seconds, like they'd done it 100 other times to 100 other women. "But what's her blood type?" "Oh, positive." They watched the blood seep out of me and drain into Mrs. Warwick. "Don't cross your ankles," Dacia said irritably. "But she'll die if it's a different type." I gasped, moving to detach myself. Ben gave a shout and stopped my hand. "No, blood type doesn't matter," he said with a greedy glint. "It's the youth in the blood." I looked at him, repulsed. "What are you talking about?" I started to feel lightheaded and felt sweat break out on my forehead. "A little more." Ben leaned forward. Mrs. Warwick started turning pinker, and as I watched, she began to change. Her face started to slim and turn almost younger. My heart pounded. "Why?" I begged. Dacia looked at me harshly. "What do you think, kiddo?" I suddenly understood why there were no younger servants at the house. They'd already given their blood and died for their mistress. I stared at the IV bag hanging between us. It had filled twice. My thoughts began to slow. I stood, my brain like a drowning man trying to keep his head afloat. I yanked the IV out of my arm, barely registering the slice of pain and the warm drip of my own blood down my arm. "Demons!" I shrieked and fumbled out. I think they were too shocked to move. I felt hot and cold together, ears starting to ring. As I half ran, half fell down the stairs and out the door, the ringing grew, my eyesight peppered with bright lights. I was not going to die for Mrs. Warwick's youth. Away from that evil house, my vision returned and the ringing partly receded. When I could breathe normally, I started running, out the open gates, to the road. I turned right, blindly. I'd left my phone, my suitcase, everything except my very life. Jude would be worried, but at least I was alive. I realized why they were cleaning the first day. They were hiding another bloodless body. Behind, in the great yawning house, a shriveled ghost body crumbled in the white bed. Ghost-like wisps of dead demon servants gathered around. Somewhere, I knew, there was a tomb lined with the bodies of young women just like me. Blood drained from their bodies and given to mistress. Their arms crossed their shriveled chests. Lilies slept above them. Warwick House, finally out of sight, I slowed to a walk. "The last one." I repeated what the old lady had said. "Mrs. Warwick used the blood of girls to give her youth again," I thought. "That's why she loved my blood on her skin so much. Wicked, demonic magic. I was the last one needed to truly restore her." I shivered, kept walking. The autumn air was crisp around me, and I finally felt clean. Gentle tendrils of rose ivy and bushes of pearled hyacinth framed the road. Somewhere above, 100 girls' bodies buried under young loam. Cool wind blew around the mouths of open-faced white lilies. Story 2. I was woken by a sharp crack, a flood of green light, and confused scream. "Giulio." The man's voice resonated in what I realized was a very small chamber, causing my ears to ache. My head didn't feel right, like my brain could fall out if I moved my head too fast. The yelling made it worse, and I shut my eyes to stop my brain leaking through the sockets. The man heard himself and brought his voice down to a firm but quieter, accusatory tone. "Why the hell? How the hell? What are you doing here? I cautiously opened my eyes. Feeling like my brain was secure, I slowly surveyed our shared box. A dozen green fairies seemed to stand to attention in a void around us. It was the green glow stick that the man had cracked, reflecting infinitely on the 4 dark walls of the box. I realized that the floor and ceiling were totally black still. The walls are metal, but the floor and ceiling are felt, I thought. The man was stood against the corner, as far from me as possible, which was less than a foot. His hair was gelled or waxed in a wild style, perhaps intended to look like fire, but his sweat, or maybe excessive hair gel, gave it more of a mossy seaweed quality. He was wrapped up in what I assumed to be motorcycle leathers, before I saw the belt buckles glint in the green light, and the sleeves that brushed the floor. A straitjacket, I wondered. Am I trapped with a madman? His eyes were fixed on me, glowing in the green light that I was now beginning to feel drowned in. Starting to panic, I continued my scan of our cell. 3 of the walls were identically unmarked, but the 4th was framed in total blackness and had a large metal circle at its center. This must be the door, I thought before ramming my shoulder into it. No, 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 the man yelled. Forgetting his volume, the pain this caused me was like being stabbed in the temple with a shard of ice. I clutched my head and curled into the corner. I'm sorry, the man said, returning to his quieter, still accusatory tone. If you hit the door too hard, you might damage the seal. When water starts coming in, we'll need the door open all the way to get out. Now, how the hell did you get in here, Julio? Actually, never mind. I made sure there was enough air in here in case something went wrong, but I didn't expect that something to be sharing the air with another person. We need to get out fast. Julio? I asked. My voice was deep and rusty. It sounded a little like warping metal and felt like grinding stone. I didn't recognize the name, but then I didn't recognize anything. I had no idea who I was or why I was here. The man had pulled his sleeves up and was pulling at the felt on the ceiling. Oh man, he said, this must be Tanya's fault. I told her not to mess with my tricks. You were probably hidden in a secret wall, that's obvious. I guess she wanted you to set off some tacky pyros down here that I would have refused and sent you, dressed as me, in case you were spotted. He'd managed to pull the felt from the ceiling and was holding a silver key that he'd plucked from the roof. Not even sparing a glance, he dropped to the floor and started tugging at the second felt square. But a compartment that small wouldn't have much air at all, and you must have been in there for the whole setup. Oxygen deprivation has messed with your head. I told her that if she didn't leave the tricks to me, then someone would get hurt. I had assumed it would be me. He tapped my foot. Shifting, I realized I must be stood on a second key. You have some kind of amnesia. He stood, a second key in his hand, and looked me in the eye again, and started to speak with excessive pomp and flair. I am Oblivion, internationally acclaimed magician, and you, my friend, are Julio, my double. Tanya is my agent. He planted his hand firmly on my shoulder. You have been invaluable to me over the years. Every good magician needs a double, so I am doubly motivated to get us out of here, healthy and alive. I think this might actually be a blessing. He raised his arm as if to show me something in the distance. The lack of distance inside what I now realized to be a safe made this particularly cliched and pretentious. Oblivion saves double from agent's failed plot, he recited. Okay, not the best headline, but that's why I need an agent. Anyway, this was meant to be my big break, the fastest ever underwater safe escape, but I knew it wasn't enough. We're way past the fastest now anyway, but firing my agent after she endangers me and my double could be front-page news. Oblivion placed one key in a tiny hole in the door, disguised as a bolt. He turned it. Click! I suddenly felt an icy cold rush over me. Wait, I croaked. Oblivion looked up at me, his hand on the second key. Wait, he asked. We can't wait. Something feels very wrong. He turned the second key. Click! I remembered everything, icy water spraying into my face, the green glow beginning to dwindle and die in the overwhelming pressure. The security mechanism on the door kicking in. Don't open the door, I said, trying to push Oblivion back. It's okay, Julio. I bit my tongue at his words. He turned to me and rested a hand on my arm. When the door unlocks, it will spring itself open. Hold your breath and shut your eyes. It will be very cold, so stay calm and hold your nose with your hand if you have to. When the water feels like it's settled, you can open your eyes and we can swim up together. The safe will fill quickly, so you won't have to wait long, and I'll drag you up if I have to, okay? Oblivion turned to the metal circle on the door. It was the mechanism for opening the safe. Inside, it had no handles, so Oblivion had to grip it between his palms. His biceps began to look like they might burst through the straitjacket. Stop, I implored. It's the security mechanism. It's going to drop a rod of metal into the hinge the moment that the cold water touches it. I knew that he knew this Oblivion would take every prop he used apart and put it back together again, to be sure his tricks would work safely. Come on, Julio. You know I wouldn't leave that in. The door creaked as the metal circle jumped a little. I stepped forward to stop him. I had run out of things to say to stop him. It had to be the truth. Someone put it back, I said. He stopped. Are you telling me the resonance in the safe made his voice sound demonic, that I've been murdered? Yes. If that's so, and you know it, Julio, venom began to seep into his words. Why would you come with me? I am not, Julio. Oblivion turned to me, his hand still on the metal circle. He studied my face. What? You said it yourself. You didn't account for 2 people when you checked there was enough air. He looked back at the door. I could see calculations running through his head. We should be unconscious, he said quietly. Yes, but we're not. At least, you're not. He continued to stare at the door. I'm not sure if I count as conscious or not, but I think you've worked out why you are. He looked up. Even in the dull green glow, I could see eyes were bloodshot and wet with tears. Is it possible? He asked. It's true, I said. I'm you. I, the living me, Oblivion, fell to the floor. He rested his back against the door. He smiled. Obviously, I understood, so I sat down and smiled with him. We didn't want a big break for the money. It wasn't for fame or women. Honestly, even a world-famous magician might not earn that much, and cheap tricks in cheap bars can get you women, albeit potentially cheap women. We did it to live forever, to be remembered like Houdini, Mesmer, Rasputin. We were happy to die if it meant we could live in the annals of history. Now, we'd been murdered, and, to top it off, I was a ghost. Maybe I could only talk to myself, but maybe, if we were really lucky, we might be able to talk to someone else. A journalist, a lawyer, an investigator, someone who could find our murderer. We would be the magician who solved our own murder, the greatest trick of all time, and even though we couldn't write our own story, we could find someone who would, a ghostwriter, if you excuse the pun. Oblivion decided to open the door to trigger the security mechanism, to make sure that he was murdered, and it didn't look like he passed out too fast to be murdered. I'm guessing he still didn't quite believe he was talking to his own ghost. He did it slowly, however, so that it would lock shut, instead of slightly open suffocation, seemed less painful than drowning. Having been the one that drowned, I suspected he was right. He passed out less than 20 minutes later. The first 10 minutes or so was good. We discussed the physics, or metaphysics, or paraphysics, I'm not sure if there's a word for it, of what had happened. A Christmas Carol taught us that ghosts can time travel, so long as it's in a way that's poignant to their own life, and I practiced passing through objects while we talked. It was difficult, but I managed to pass my hand through one of the small squares of felt before I watched myself die. It felt pretty good talking to myself. We had a lot in common and shared a few of our favorite memories. It's odd that, despite being the same person, his oxygen-deprived brain started to pick up on things that I really had to work to remember. I'd always told people that I took up magic at university, to pay for pints at the end of the week, but oblivion reminded me of my uncle at my 5th birthday. He performed a magic show for me and my friends in my back garden. After a bunch of mundane card tricks and making the family cat disappear, his finale was sawing my dad in half. Everyone was a little tired of the same old tricks until Dad began to scream and writhe in the tacky magic box. Mom cried out his name and began to run over, crying, but my uncle had a wicked grin on his face and only sped up. Blood was dripping faster and faster from the box that Dad laid in. A red pool began to build and flow towards my feet. The other children began to cry, but I kept watching in unbridled fascination. This only seemed to spur my uncle on. Finally, his saw jerked as if cutting through the last piece of Dad, then dropped to the floor with a rough, scraping clink. There was a devastating silence, accented with the whimpers of a child, muffled against their father's chest. Then my uncle and Dad burst into laughter. They bellowed out laughter for minutes and minutes. Even as Dad clambered out of half the magic box, fake blood covering his jeans, they could not stop laughing. Mom managed to calm the parents down, and even managed to get a little sympathy. She was, of course, a great thespian and masterminded the whole thing. I never really remembered that day, at least not in detail. But Oblivion rattled that off like he was 5 again, boasting about his crazy family in the playground. That was where our love for magic really came from, the clash of fiction and reality in front of our eyes, the joy in the laughter, the raw emotion in the children and their parents. Oblivion was taking more and more deep breaths as he spoke. The story of my uncle was the last coherent thing he said. After that, he was confused. He started to ask who I was and how he got there. He began to think he was imprisoned for scamming people or that a trick had simply gone wrong. Although this wasn't far from the truth, it was clear that lack of oxygen was causing panic. He began to breathe deeper and deeper, faster and faster. I could see green specks of light reflecting off of his clammy skin. He tried running into the door, but he would just slump against it. He'd forgotten that the security system had locked him in and began whimpering. It sounded like he was trying to call for help, but he didn't have the strength to make a noise. Finally, his eyes shut and rhythmic pumping of his chest began to wither, as silence finally fell on my life. I had drowned. It was 20 horrific seconds. You don't get dropped underwater in a locked safe without looking up what happens when you drown. It had felt like my lungs were being simultaneously frozen and torn apart, but it only lasted 20 seconds. I had just watched myself fall into a crazed panic, and I wondered if I'd made the right call to let the door shut. At that moment, I guess I died, because the memory of the last hour snapped into my mind from his perspective. It felt like a flash grenade had gone off in the safe. It turns out that worse than drowning or suffocating is both. Passing through the wall of a safe is much harder than passing through felt. I didn't get very far before I started to feel the safe tremor. I worried that I was moving on remarkably, where it hadn't crossed my mind until now, but this concern was superseded by the fear that no one would hear my story. After about a minute, clinging to my dead body in an attempt to anchor myself to this plane of existence, there was a high-pitched grinding noise coming from the door. The green glow was eventually confused by the blinding orange glow of sparks pouring in from the doorframe. I realized that I wasn't moving on, but that the safe had been pulled up. I imagined the rescue team trying to saw their way into the safe, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people looking on from behind a flimsy metal fence. I bet they all thought it was part of the trick. The door would open, and the safe would be empty. Then I would appear, 10 feet above them, on a platform in the middle of the crowd. That was essentially how I had planned the trick to end. Instead, they finally cut through the hinges, after wasting over an hour around the rest of the safe, and the door began to fall away. I wasn't blinded by light. Crew had taken so long that the sun had sunk below the city skyline. I simply looked out at a crowd in horrified silence. Tonya cried out my name. People covered their mouths. Then there was silence, save for the sound of a child crying into their father's chest. It is known the world over that ancient houses foster many secrets. Mas Manor was no exception. If these walls could speak, the yarns they'd spin would blanket the entire world twice over. The stories that fill these halls echo across time. It is said that fear is something that comes from a lack of understanding, and these echoes of the past are often misconstrued, mistaken for malevolent spirits. But why? Does a ghost kill? Does it do anything more than wander about, locked forever in a sliver of time? A ghost is a ghost because it's an apparition. But what if ghosts are not already dead? Then what do we call that? A haunting paradox indeed. Mas Manor was one of the oldest houses in America, its foundations laid before the Constitution itself. Many generations and many families had called it home. Its namesake had changed many times over the years, but the one that stuck is that of the Mas family. It was well known how a tragic tale had befallen them, and only a single generation spent any time there. Yet their name remained, lingering ever since. Jerry had heard the stories of the manor, had researched it thoroughly, and tonight he and his crew would seek to answer that age-old question, are ghosts real? Maggie and Leroy were already inside, setting up cameras. Jerry was scribbling notes in his journal. A soft rain was falling, creating a soothing atmosphere in the van parked just in front of Manor. Jerry looked up from his journal, took it all in. The manor was still in good repair, all things considered. The city was converting the manor into a museum, and much of the outside was refurbished, maintaining the original style. The manor itself was encircled by tall walls of stone, completely covered in green leafy vines. The first-floor windows were huge. At night, one could easily peer inside from a distance away. The windows above were smaller and more spaced out. They were all closed, save one on the third floor, which appeared to have drifted open. Jerry opened the passenger side door and stepped out, soft gravel crackling underneath his feet. He closed the door and entered the mansion. The main entry hall was gallantly lit up with a crystal chandelier in the center, hovering over the stairs which split off in two directions before going up to the second floor. Each side of the manor house had additional stairs that allowed access to all 3 floors. The wood flooring was stained dark brown. The walls were pale gray with trim that matched the floor. The house itself had a mildew smell, even a slight stench of decay. It gave an eerie feel to the atmosphere that Jerry loved. This was what it's all about. The team members were finishing up when Jerry came in. He quickly assessed their work and then ordered the lights out for the night. Outside, the sun was already setting. With the cloudy rain and mist, it was already very dark once they began. It wasn't long before their quarry came out to greet them. A boy, no older than 10, with almost white blonde hair and eyes that glowed a soft blue. The boy looked directly at Jerry. It raised its arms and displayed its hands to him. Maggie and Leroy gasped audibly. Then it spoke. These are the hands of the Afmas. The blood of my forebears has stained them. Blood and ash. The child paused, his expression blank, as if he were asleep but for his eyes being open. Jerry felt his throat go dry. His legs were stone. Couldn't flee, even if he wanted to. Never in all his time had it ever been this clear to him. It was all so real and surreal at the same time. A ghost. A real ghost. All is lost. It's already over now. I can't even clean it from my hands. They're covered in black, but it won't come off. Why won't it come off? The boy let out a sorrowful wail, eyes filled with tears. His figure began to fade until all that remained was the echo of his cries. As suddenly as he had first appeared, he was gone. The wailing sounds remained for a short time after, and all of it was on tape. This was going to be his masterpiece, Jerry thought. And the night has only just begun. Sabrina stumbled into the dimly lit room of the servant quarters. She was situated on the 3rd floor. It was late in the evening, and her clothing was disheveled from the hours she spent working the kitchen. She could hear a commotion stirring somewhere downstairs, running footsteps and yelling. Most likely it was little Lenny sleepwalking again. Poor child. The manor was always cold this time of year. She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself as she walked over to the half-open window to close it for the night. A single candle was lit near her bed, its flame dancing in the drafty breeze. She furrowed her brow as she closed the window, trying to recall when she'd even opened it and why she would do such a thing. She latched the window shut and jumped in alarm when sounds of whispers filled the room. The candlelight stilled, as if frozen in place. The room itself had stilled, as if locked into a sliver of time, and yet the strange sounds persisted. She held her breath and looked about, eyes wide, as she tried to identify the source of the noise. She couldn't find a thing. Nobody was in her room. But Sabrina could feel it. A strange pressure on her chest and angst. The certainty that someone was watching her inconspicuously. She shuddered and took a step back, her slender figure brushing up against the cool glass of the window. The whispering stopped as quickly as it had started, but it was replaced by something else. Creaking floorboards groaned, as if from footsteps. In the empty room, the noise seemed to be approaching her. The candlelight, the blessed light, vanished without warning. Darkness enveloped everything, and Sabrina was ready to scream. She put her hands over her ears and crouched onto the floor, too frightened to move. The candlelight abruptly returned. The flame began to move about once more, and a coolness overtook her, making her skin crawl. She slowly turned and looked towards the window, which was unlatched and open, the cool night air filling the room once again. Elsewhere in the manor, Sheila Afmas, the lady of the house, was tucking her child into bed. Although it was commonly the duty of the servants, tonight she felt compelled to do it herself. Leonard Ahmas, or Lenny for short, was a tiny child for his age. His blonde hair was almost white. It contrasted his pale, light blue eyes. Eyes pale enough to reflect the candlelight next to his bed. They almost glowed in the dimly lit room. Lenny was prone to sleepwalking, and lately he'd been found at odd hours of the night, roaming the hallways and speaking gibberish. The doctor had visited earlier in the evening and couldn't find a thing wrong with him. Not physically, anyways. He had recommended the parents spend some extra time with Lenny. His hope was that these nighttime strolls were merely the predisposition of a child troubled by his parents' frequent absences. Sheila and her husband Mark owned a business in town, a factory that was bustling this time of year in preps for winter. They were constantly embroiled in one task or another, keeping everything running smoothly. This meant they were often unavailable for Lenny, which may be contributing to the problems. "Mom?" Lenny asked, as Sheila tucked him underneath the sheets, nice and snug. "Yes, dear? Do you believe in ghosts?" Sheila opened her mouth to reply, but was interrupted by a loud thudding noise in the floor above them. Strange. That part of the house was never occupied. It was storage space. Something must have fallen. She went to the bedroom door and opened it, peeking outside into the hallway. One of the many servants of the manor happened to be walking by, and she instructed them to look into the noise coming from above. She shut the door and was greeted by more noises and thuds. She could also hear what sounded like yelling. Good heavens! What was going on up there? Gregory filed his party into the dusty room, the tourists whispering animatedly as they followed him in. This was the final leg of the Ahmaz Moor, concluding here in the servants' quarters. To his dismay, the room was stale and rank with the odor of decay yet again. His boss had explicitly told the staff in OT to close the windows in this part of the house. Yet there it was, closed. Again. He huffed angrily and stalked over to the window to open it back up. Just then, a smart aleck child among the tourists flipped the light switch near the door, plunging the room into darkness. A stern warning from an angry parent was followed by the lights returning to the room as abruptly as they disappeared. Gregory opened the window. Tyler, he thought. Tyler probably closed it on his way out. The idiot! As he turned to face the group, Gregory got the strangest sensation someone was staring at him. He could almost swear he heard a soft, whimpering noise. Right behind him. He looked back near the window. Nobody was there, of course. He shrugged and turned towards the tourists again, and all of them were now as silent as the grave. They were looking directly at him, or past him. Once more, he turned to look at the window. The same window he just opened mere seconds ago was closed. A silhouette hovered nearby, the figure of a slender woman that seemed to be staring right at him. The room was still and quiet. Everyone could see her. Gregory had heard the stories, but he never really believed them. He chalked it off to the common tall tales that follow many an old manor house like this one. Foolishness, he'd thought. Ghosts aren't real. How could he have been so wrong? Denise was new to the crew, having moved here from up north. Moving boxes and furniture was tedious work, but her build was ideal for it. Problem was, she was also clumsy as hell. She was carrying 2 boxes at once. Here on the 3rd floor, there was tons of stuff to move. The storage spaces were full here, and most of this stuff had to be taken out. It was all meant to be sorted out and catalogued, either to be auctioned off or returned here in preparation for converting the old home into a museum. The first box she was carrying was snug in her long arms. The second one, not so much. It slipped rather suddenly from atop the first box and fell to the floor, its contents spilling noisily about. Her boss was standing right there, of course, and he looked at her with an annoyed expression. She returned his gaze with an apologetic look, then set the box down and began to pick up the loose items. They say when it rains, it pours. So naturally, her hips bumped into a stack of boxes, and the entire stack came tumbling down. More noise. More mess. Fabulous. Sorry, Denise cried out. This, unfortunately, didn't save her from the inevitable tirade of swear words and admonishment from the boss man. He was already grouchy today. What a wicked man tongue he had. Is he even allowed to say that? She found herself blushing, trying to hide it as she scrambled about, writing the boxes and filling the contents back into them. She heard a gasp behind her, but when she looked to see who it was, no one there. Her boss had stormed off minutes ago. Just getting creeped out by the old place, she thought. Then the boxes moved, of their own accord. Sliding across the floor, one lifted into the air. That was all she saw. That was all she needed to see. Denise screamed and fled the room. She ran past her boss, who was going down the stairs on the side of the manor house. She didn't even notice how she nearly knocked him off his feet, which would have been disastrous on a hardwood staircase. She ran outside next to the moving truck. She was panting at this point, pale as a ghost herself. What the hell was all that? She turned and looked up at the windows of the third floor, towards the storage rooms. It was dark, and she could barely see a thing up there, but her heart froze when she noticed a figure in one of the windows. A man in an antiquated suit, a sad expression on his face, and clearly not one of the movers. Denise screamed again. Marcus Ahmas was still wearing his suit and tie as he wandered aimlessly about the manor, barely even seeing what was around him. The eyes in the dark recesses of the house that ominously watched him as he walked by barely registered in the back of his mind. He simply didn't care. Everything in the house was covered in sheets. Various candelabras throughout the manor remained lit, but everyone else was gone. He'd sent them away, all of them, even his wife and child. Shelia's parents were kind enough to offer their home to them. They hadn't any choice but to accept. Everything was gone. The factory, his factory, was now an ashen heap, a skeleton of its former splendor. Arson, they'd said. The suspicion of foul play, a paltry excuse for the crooks in town to not pay out his insurance claim. It left the Ahmas family with nothing, completely destitute. And no justice would be done, for there was no way to know who it was that set his factory ablaze. Eventually, he found himself on the third floor, the storage rooms. He gazed out the window, seeing very little. He pondered his fate, so sudden as it was. A piercing scream from outside echoed into the halls of Ahmanor. Marcus snapped out of his reverie, momentarily to look around. Nobody was there. However, the distraction of the moment was fleeting, and he quickly found himself returning to his melancholy state, subdued and defeated. He turned about, heading towards the servant quarters. His skin prickled in the cool air. This part of the mansion was much colder than the rest of the place. Sabrina, of the kitchen staff, had left her door ajar in her rush to go. He went in. The candle alongside her bed was still alight. He'd made the staff leave quite abruptly, telling them to take their belongings and get out. Just leave. It was all finished now. Inside her room, the window was open wide, invitingly, almost beckoning him. He slowly walked towards the window, then peered down. A soft rain was falling outside. The wet pavement below looked welcoming to him. He considered only briefly before committing himself to the ground. As he dove headfirst out the window, a few things happened. First, he heard a commotion behind him. Then, as he fell, he heard that woman screaming once more. Just before he hit the cold, wet earth, he thought of that old Irish legend, the Banshee, harbinger of death. Jerry was beyond excited about all the hard evidence they'd gathered this night. He'd sent Maggie and Leroy ahead to the hotel, instructing them to analyze it all. So much had happened, and most of it was all on tape. He was doing a quick run through the old manor house before he'd return to town to get some well-deserved rest. Everything was still in Afma's manor now, save for the soft footsteps of Jerry as he made his way through each room. He finally found himself in the old servants' corner of the house. One room had its door ajar, so he went inside. Whispers filled his ears, making his heart race in anticipation. How extraordinary! Then he saw a figure near the window, a man in a suit who was leaning out farther than anyone should. Under normal circumstances, the studious Jerry would have recalled the legendary fate of one Marcus Afmas, but he was too excited, and his reaction was more organic. He yelped in fear, running up to grab the shoulders of the man to haul him back inside. Only the man was an apparition, another one. Jerry went right through it, and his eyes bulged as his momentum carried him up and over the windowsill. He too heard that strange wailing scream as he fell down, D-O-W-N. Then blackness. Utter and complete, much like the tapes were upon review back at the hotel. Maggie and Leroy were not looking forward to breaking the news to Jerry that they had nothing. Nothing to show for it. They wouldn't have to worry about that for long. Silence filled the halls of Afmanor, interrupted by the occasional sounds of a window on the third floor as it opened and closed, again and again. Soft footsteps and whispers could also be heard on occasion, were anyone there to hear it, sounds coming and going without warning. And then there was the boy with light blonde hair who wandered the halls, a sleepwalker with eyes glowing a soft blue. He'd only wanted his parents to stay. That was all. Racked with guilt, the boy wept, his soft cries echoing across the darkened halls of Ahmars for all time. Henrietta was the youngest daughter of the Lovitts, born the seventh child on the 7th day of the 7th month of the year. She was the only daughter to survive past her teen years. Her older sisters succumbed to many methods of death. One was beaten by her drunken husband. One had died from hypothermia in a row house. One had died from a factory accident. Henrietta survived, despite all odds. A curse seemed to linger on the Lovitt women. She was born with an intelligent mind, a love of animals and nature, and she was lovely. Whether she was beautiful was completely decided by the eyes of others. Henrietta cared about her health, caring for her physical appearance as one should. Beauty was completely irrelevant to who she was, despite her mother's and father's objections. When she was at the tender age of 20, she fell into the horrible dread of her mortality. She wondered about her life, and if anything was truly worth the idea of life. The first mercy granted to her was by a man named Rupert Blackwood, the father to the man she would be married to. Rupert, dressed finely in his plaid vest and matching suit, took the hand of Henrietta as she stepped into the carriage. She was dressed as warmly as possible by her mother and wished well. She would never return to her family and would be married to a man she had never met. Henrietta tried to think of what compelled her to go. Not the marriage, not the idea of life better than she could be provided. Not her depression leads her to simply take life one day at a time. There was something else in her mind, but she did not know what it was. It would not take long for her to find out. Henrietta watched the outside of the window, hands folded together, clutching a handkerchief. Rupert, who sat across from her in their carriage, remained quiet. He figured it would be highly inappropriate to break her thoughts. It was she who broke the silence, Mr. Blackwood. Her voice was soothing like a melody, steady despite her nerves. Perhaps we should engage in conversation. Even a little would be sufficient. Miss Lovitt, I apologize. I did not wish to disturb you. How could my father-in-law disturb me? He smiled politely. He was so even in every expression. You are very kind. Would you like to know the appearance of your husband? I do not care about his appearance, she chose to say. Tell me about who he is as a gentleman. His eyes watched her for a second. Well, I suppose he is a gentleman. Considerate of his appearance and his civility in the public eyes. When he speaks with such care and gentleness. Though he is quiet, he is deeply reflective. Does he enjoy animals? He is rather fond of cats and greyhounds. He has always loved greyhounds. He now owns one by the name of Biscuit. She could not help herself and burst into a giggle. The woman covered her mouth, clearing her throat. And there are a couple of cats now occupying his home, Edgar and Bast. Bast was a rather interesting choice, but he adores them all. Does he smoke cigarettes? No. Does he partake of alcohol regularly? Only during social gatherings, holidays, and such. Is he well read? Yes, quite well. There is a library in his home. He noticed how she lit up at the thought of it. He was instructed by private tutors and is very talented as a pianist. He seems quite wonderful, she offered, looking at her lap. She looked out again. Will he be kind? He seemed completely surprised by her question, replying honestly in the affirmative. Thank you. That's all I could ever want. It was a divine manner, exquisite in every sense of the word. It seemed almost like a castle. Turreted towers, endless windows, it could only be empty with all of its space. It was stretching into the lawn, which was flourishing with roses of all kinds. She gasped at the sight, seeing the magnitude, feeling the odd desire to run through the halls of it. Rupert extended his arm to guide her inside. She obediently slipped her hand around his arm, and they walked together. The doors opened, and she felt the first wave of warmth she'd never felt before. It was not dreary, but decorated with such a heavy palette of colors. Everything around her in the front hall was deep to her eyes. She blinked for several minutes and looked at Rupert. I find a woman could create something more homely. Perhaps, she offered. Your husband is somewhere around here, but I will find him for you. Will I meet my mother-in-law? In due time, Rupert told her. Please excuse me. He disappeared, climbing the stairs. She watched him go, staying in her spot. She listened around herself, crossing to look out the windows. She crossed again, finding a painting of a woman in a wedding dress, sitting while her husband stood directly behind her. Henrietta studied it for a moment, catching a sharp voice behind her. Miss Lovett. The matriarch of the family stood behind her, stern in every sense. She stood with her shoulders back, eyes direct, wearing a plain purple dress. She seemed not able to be touched, a creature beyond the mortal plane of existence. Mrs. Blackwood? None other, she said. The woman took a step forward, getting closer to a better look at the younger woman. She said nothing, picked up her skirts, and walked away. Her footsteps echoed in the corridor, showing the home's vastness. Henrietta watched, feeling a little bit of hot rage seize in her chest. Why on earth would she do such a thing? Rupert gave a little call, returning with his collected son. Here you are, my dear. I hope he is to your liking. The young man stood at his full height, looking like a giant in comparison to his wife. His hair was blonde and messy, eyes a bright evergreen. He seemed unbearably shy in his every movement. This is Merritt Blackwood. We call him Mary. The father presented him, standing beside them as they greeted the other. Henrietta managed to form a hello, feeling her embarrassment flood her senses. In her mind, she had imagined him older than her. A refined older man, looking similar to his father with their matching gray hair and lined faces. But he was young handsome and so bright. Mr. Blackwood is very nice to meet you. Her face became a little pink, trying to maintain her dignity. Merritt, now joining her in a similar demeanor, offered with kindness, Miss Lovett, I am quite honored you are here. He gave a little bow, hands not leaving from behind him. Rupert bit his lip to back his delight at the sight of these two awkward young people. Mary, why don't you show Mrs. Lovett around? The modification did not leave as they walked through the corridors. The staff watched them, bursting into giggling as they walked past. Henrietta tried to focus on the rooms around her, but it was all for naught. Are you often so quiet when you are beside a woman, Mr. Blackwood? Only around handsome women, Miss Lovett, he replied, shocking himself with his gall. Ah, yes, thank you. I apologize. No, Mr. Blackwood, I am not annoyed by your compliment, she reassured him. In hopes to not stir her courage any further, I find you quite handsome. He was thrown through a loop, stumbling on his own 2 feet, hastily recovering. May I call you Henrietta? He nearly exclaimed. His courage was climbing ever so slowly. Yes. May I call you Mary? Yes, of course. May I show you your wing? May I see the library instead? Do you enjoy literature, Henrietta? He loved the way her name rolled off his tongue. I adore it. You may consider it yours. Take from it whenever you want. He ushered her there, showing her the room as it encompassed a room of its own. She wished she had eyes all around her, so she could see more of it. The room was giant, windows on every side, so the natural light could illuminate it. Books were all to the ceiling. It was a world of knowledge she had longed for her entire life. The woman's eyes felt teary from her happiness. It was the first time Mary had smiled at her directly. Henrietta spent the rest of the day in the library, beginning first with the novel Pride and Prejudice. She drank down the beauty of Jane Austen's words, finishing by dinner time. She was ushered by a maid named Dorothy to the dining room. She whispered a quick good luck and escaped to gossip with her peers. Henrietta saw the family already there, Mrs. Blackwood at the head of the table. Her husband beside her, the son across from him. Henrietta took a step into the lion's den. The table sat down, beginning dinner with a silent note. Mary looked at her, smiling with such intimacy. He leaned over, whispering to her, "You are captivating." The woman blushed again, looking at the table, thanking him, as that was all she could muster. The matriarch's eyes focused on the woman, starting the discussion between them. Ms. Lovett, Mrs. Blackwood, do you find this home acceptable? She mulled on the thought, trying to determine what she was meant to say. It is unlike anything I have ever seen. The men looked between them. Are you the youngest of the family? Do you have sisters in society? No, sadly, I am the only daughter in my family now living. My 4 brothers are all living and in society with families of their own. You are the only daughter alive? Yes, Henrietta managed. There was a pause in the room. The matriarch seemed quite sad by that idea. What do you believe is essential to the family? Essential? I do not understand. What benefits the family in its entirety? What will create the ideal family? Perhaps the family is a unique concept, considering every individual in it and what their role is. The mother is the foundation. The father is the leader. The sons and daughters will create and form their own families. It is the parents who will ensure each child will become a functioning member of society, able to be adjusted to social conversation and met with kindness. Would you say your family was met with such an idea? My mother is brilliant able to adapt despite all hardship, chin held high. My father is hard-working, wanting only to ensure his family's livelihood. Answer the question, Miss Lovett. She cleared her throat, taking a long sip of her drink before replying, no. I was forced into the role of mothering my brothers, expected to be a daughter of perfection, deprived of my education to meet the needs of others. And look at where you are now. The woman set down her silverware very sharply. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Blackwood. You should be honored to be here. The only daughter left, you must provide a son to create a far better family. What woman would you be? I would be a woman of my own accord. As I'm sure you are, and as I am. You speak so freely for someone so young of an age. She answered, how could you be raised to be so brash? We're your sisters, the very same. Henrietta stood up, hands grasping her dress skirts, voice shaky from her anger. Mrs. Blackwood. She resisted her tears the best she could. How dare you say such a thing? Rupert's eyes were so wide, they showed all of their white exteriors. Mary leaned back in his seat, flicking back and forth between them like a tennis match. The nature of my upbringing was indeed flawed, but that is not your concern. Nor will I sit here and listen to it freely. What woman are you to dismiss the experiences of another? The audacity of you, Mrs. Blackwood. Her hands shook. Her bottom lip began to quiver from her choked-back tears, now rolling down her face. There was a heavy silence at the table. Rupert turned to look at his wife, who had said nothing. Mary's smirk was wide. Mrs. Blackwood burst into a laugh, pleased, merit. Yes, mother, you will have this woman's hand in marriage by the end of the week, or I will consider it the highest of disrespect to me. Yes, I will do my best, he agreed, removing his handkerchief from inside his pocket to give to Henrietta. She did not understand for a moment, seeing how her mother-in-law's expression had changed into something of joy. She took the cloth and wiped her face, sitting back down. What is this? Think of it as an induction into the family. Why on earth would I want my son to not marry a woman with passion? One with the ability to be fearless? Her similarities to Mary were striking when she grinned. Completely unnecessary, I say. I do not believe, if I were not one of passion, that would make me any less worthy of your son's attention. She laughed again. Yes, I know, but I believe every woman is capable of such passion. She merely shows in different ways. I like the ones that aren't afraid to be outraged. A mad woman is my favorite kind. If she isn't mad about something, then she isn't paying attention. Now, what are you angry about? Women cannot vote. Good. What else? Animals are beaten, left to die in the streets, and cruelty is often. Yes, yes, keep going. They continued to speak. Mary watched them go with only excitement. The next day, she met Edgar and Bast, laying in the sun in the library, both inky black. She bent down to pet them, receiving their attention. Mary returned with Biscuit, a long, handsome animal with a prominent pointed nose. She kissed the animal, who whined with the thrill of her affection. They took the boy outside and watched him run about the lawn. Henrietta? Yes, Mary? If you like animals, would you like more of them? Yes, many of them. They spoke nearly all day, finding the other had much more in common than they realized. Both were lovers of the arts, wanted to assert themselves further into politics, and they found the other braced the realization they were doomed to die one day. I think of it quite a bit, Mary murmured, fearing she would reject him. Do you ever imagine you are dead? Or why you cannot see your future? She asked him. He looked at her, relief flooding his every shaken nerve. Someone understood. When my sister Eliza died, everything fell into me. Women are not as protected, and it encompasses every woman. What? What is the point of the existing sometimes? I do not properly understand, Mary offered softly. But I want to. He extended his hand, waiting for her to take it. She took it and decided she would never let it go. Henrietta awoke in the middle of the night, feeling her stomach churn. She threw back her covers as her skin prickled. Her feet touched the cool floor, debating to leave the room. She heard a soft murmur outside of the door which propelled her. The door creaked open and the smell of something vile hit her. It was the smell of unwashed humans. She entered the corridor, looking around to detect the scent's location. Hen, murmured a voice beside her ear. Hen? She twisted around and saw the faded silhouette of Eliza. Her skin was shredded, starting at her legs. Her dress was stained from the blood. Hen? She looked over and saw Emma, skin black and body naked. Henny. Then came Jane, beaten. Her neck had the marks of large hands around them. Henrietta felt her terror rake through her, trying to breathe, trying to resist everything around her. She could not move. She could not scream. She begged for someone, anyone to come and find her and save her. They echoed her name, entering her mind. All of them got closer and closer. She collapsed into the floor, bursting into tears. I cannot help you. Please, what do you want? She wept. Henrietta melted into her hands, burying in her knees, begging it all to stop. What are you crying for? Aren't you happy to see us? Asked Jane, bending over. Henrietta peeked from her fingers, seeing something much more familiar. Jane with soothing eyes and long hair, wearing her most favorite brown dress. Emma with her freckled skin, strong arms and legs. And Eliza, delicate and small in her structure. Her smile, though, was giant. She continued to cry, You're all dead. Well, yeah, said Emma. Doesn't mean we ain't real. Don't cry, Hen, said Eliza. What is this? She whimpered out. What do you reckon? Joined Mrs. Blackwood, scanning the women around her. Henrietta's eyes got wide, tears slowly dissolving. Smile, my dear. Not many of us get the chance to see our sisters again. You can see them? Of course. Can't you? How? A curse is a curse, my dear. I know your pain all too well. The sisters looked at her, seeing Henrietta stopped crying. Blackwood bent down, grazing a tear on her cheek. Is that why you want me to marry your son? God, no. That's your decision, not mine. But I like seeing a kindred spirit. I want to marry him. But will you? Teach me what this is. Henrietta, I most certainly will. Story 2. Tittle, Twisted Arcadia. Ah, there I was, standing in front of my new house. I had finally found a new house to replace my cramped apartment. That place was terrible. The apartment was a little bigger than my room at my parents' house, and I had the worst roommates. They were so messy, only had pizza that was sometimes charged to MYCARD, the list goes on. They would also hold these parties every night, and they always let people into my room, leaving it trashed and ransacked. Actually, the whole apartment would be a mess. In fact, when I was out one night working a double shift, I came back to find a couple on my bed, eating the food I was going to have for dinner. It was ramen, but even so, I was still angry, watching Netflix on my computer. I lost it that night, and the parties stopped. They did have one every now and then, but they made sure to never let anyone into my room, and they clean up after the party. But they probably did it out of fear I might burst again. My landlord also did nothing about it. After graduating from college, I realized I didn't have to live in the apartment anymore, so I packed my stuff and found a new home. When I came to settle everything about the house, the guy selling me the house seemed ecstatic. But not your average guy. I sold a house today. He seemed to be trembling when he was talking with me, and when I bent down to tie my shoe, I saw him clenching his fists, and his knuckles seemed to be pale as a sheet. When I asked who had previously lived here, he almost choked. Gah, no. Nobody has lived here before, he croaked. His voice cracked and sounded high-pitched. I noted that he kept glancing towards the house next to mine. After the award meeting, I officially moved into my home. After loading all of the boxes into the house, I figured before I unpack anything I should say hi to my new neighbors. I exited the house and walked down the sidewalk to their home. When I arrived on their driveway, I heard some noise. I peeked around the house to see a shadow dragging something behind the house. I tried to look closer, but it was too dark. The shadow seemed to have something clenched over what I thought was the face of the thing it was dragging. It seemed awfully strange, but I didn't think too much about it. Seeing the shadow made me wonder why the guy who sold me the house kept looking over here. I put it away in my mind and rung the doorbell. Ding dong. It chimed. I suddenly heard a thud and footsteps come closer to the door. A woman opened the door. Oh, Gary, you've finally come. Do you have what we asked for? The woman said without looking up at me. When she did, she looked surprised. Huh? Who are you? She asked. I'm Jason. I just moved into the house next door. I was just coming by to say hi to my new neighbors, I said. The woman suddenly went pale for a second before managing to control herself. Well, hello. I'm Mary. Sorry for being a bit rude with the She chucked. No problem. If I saw a complete stranger at my door, I would probably react the same way. I responded. We talked for a bit, and I told her about my old apartment. Oh, that's terrible. I can't imagine living like that. Mary sympathized. Soon, the subject came to something that threw Mary off. Hey, I saw some shadow in your backyard, I said suddenly. Mary put on a weird, almost forced smile. Oh my, living in that apartment must be terrible, she repeated, though this time she shook her head sideways as if to say no. I also felt a chill creep up my spine. Mary tried to pull me back, but I broke out of her grip and looked behind the house. I saw the shadow from earlier. It inched closer. Mary tried to grab me, but it was too late. The shadow lunged at me, and I shouted, G-A-A-A-A-H-H-H-H-H-H. Gah, I shouted. I quickly sat up to find myself in a bed. I got up and realized I was in my new house. I looked at the time. It was 3:00 a.m. I felt pain circling around my chest. I touched it and felt some warm liquid. I looked at my chest to see dripping crimson. Blood, I muttered. I felt insanely sluggish and sore. I stumbled to the closet to see if I had any bandages and painkillers. After covering the wound in my chest, I went through the closet to look for painkillers. I had none. I panicked because I was really sore. I decided to look up where the nearest pharmacy was. It was a few blocks away. I didn't feel good enough to drive, so I walked. I imagined that it would be an amazing sight to see a zombie-like man stumbling through an average suburban neighborhood at 3 in the morning, dripping blood from his chest. When I arrived at the pharmacy, one of the cashiers screamed, "Wow!" "Holy!" She trailed off as she fainted. The other cashier came out of the break room looking mildly surprised. He glanced at me and asked if I needed any painkillers. "Yes, please," I said. I figured, we've seen worse people come here. "This is just the girl's first day," he told me. "Eesh. That's rough," I said. He reached behind the counter and grabbed a bottle. That's when I realized I hadn't even brought my wallet. I cursed under my breath as I told him I didn't have anything to pay with. "Don't worry, it's on the house. I think you may need them more than this store needs $5. He responded. "Thanks," I said gratefully. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to lift my friend over here onto the cot we have in the break room," he said. I arrived back home and swallowed a pill, putting the rest of the bottle in my closet. I then went to bed and waited until the next night to investigate what really happened. See, I knew that everything hadn't been just a dream. You can't get heavy wounds in your sleep. I knew that the shadow that had attacked me was what had caused me to get the wounds. What I didn't get was I wasn't instantly killed by the attack. It confused me because something like that would end me instantly. Once the next night rolled around, I snuck out and crouched in front of Mary's house. There was light on, and I was pretty sure I saw figures inside, so I opened the window slightly and hid under it. They couldn't see me, but I could hear them. I heard footsteps walk into the room, as well as something scurry into the room. I figured Mary was the footsteps, and the small footsteps were the alien being that had almost killed me. Mary shut the blinds and turned off the lights before she talked. "Why would you do that?" He wasn't hostile yet. Mary hissed. "Be quiet, pawn. You shalt question what I do," the alien said. It had a raspy, deep voice. Something you would wish you never heard after hearing it. It sent chills down my throat. "Yes, I do. As long as I am caring for you and providing protection for you, I have a say in things too," Mary argued. "Shut up. My kind does not need anything from you," the alien said, clearly agitated. "Well, you didn't have to kill him. Do you know how much energy it takes out of me to resurrect the dead? I couldn't move for a day," Mary said. "Resurrect?" The gears clicked in my head. I had died, but I had been brought back from the dead. "By Mary?" Suddenly, the alien grunted. "Be quiet, pawn. I sense a presence." Both of them went silent. "I can't let them find out about our powers and the plan," the alien said. Mary seemed to start backing away in a panic. Curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up, and what I saw. Mary was backing away towards the door and with a terrified look on her face. The alien was approaching her, and its tail suddenly sprouted a spear-like edge. "No, no, no. You don't have to do this." Her sentence came to an abrupt end when the alien speared her in the chest. "Holy!" I clenched my hands to my mouth. The alien dropped her, and she started bleeding. Even more terrifying, Mary started disintegrating into dust. Soon, all that remained of her was just blood, dust, and her clothes. The alien's head then did a 180 and turned to face me. I was so terrified, I started sprinting back to my house as fast as I could. In hopes to reassure me, I told myself it was just a dream. Just a dream, just a dream, just a GLARGAEREAM. I ran into my house and shut the door, barricading it with my kitchen cabinet and my bookshelf. It was enough to keep the alien at bay. After a little bit of various bangs and trying to keep the just a dream mindset, even though deep down I knew it wasn't. The alien realized he would be caught and fled. I'm still haunted by this memory to this day, and I still see hints that it's watching me, like various claw marks, footprints, and stains across my house. Please, watch out.